Welcome to Fast Wheeler, where I'm taking a running and driving Porsche 911 3.6 manual and swapping in a Corvette LS3 all-aluminium V8. How hard can it be? Chavis Performance Engineering have developed a full conversion kit that includes all aluminium billet CNC engine mounts, motor plates, clutch and flywheel adapter kit to adapt the V8 to the factory Porsche transmission and drivetrain, full engine wiring harness and GM ECU to interface with the Porsche factory ECU. Everything in the interior will work factory Porsche, and even an AC kit. And if you're really technical, you might have one of the following questions. The V8 is only slightly longer than the factory flat 6, so we're going to move the transmission forward about an inch, which is well within the capability of the CV axles. The LS3 is about 10 kilos lighter than the factory Porsche engine. Yes, this has a sump conversion kit on it that's better baffled than the factory Porsche sump. What about the factory power steering? Chavis Engineering sells an electric over hydraulic power steering conversion that bolts in the front, in the fruit, because it's a front boot. When disassembling the drivetrain, you're going to want to recover as much as possible, so keep those coolant lines intact as well as you can, especially if you're selling the engine. The wiring harness for the engine disconnects with these two plugs to the body here, so the harness will come out complete with the engine. Also in the same area you have the AC lines and the power steering lines you need to disconnect. Here are the two electrical connectors after you pull them off. One has a black ring, one has a grey ring.
Now, because of the specific year of my 996.2, it's a 2002, we're going to retain the factory oil pressure sending unit to keep, and we're plugging it into the LS3 that's over there. So it's located here on the passenger side of the engine. So in the wiring kit we have the CPE developed kit. This will plug into the Porsche side somewhere. I'm going to figure that out. The other electronics is this box. This interface connects to this, which has got a diagnostic light. That's the connection for that box. This is the connection for this box. We also have this. This is your OBD2 end with a Deutsch connector, very nice. Battery extension. This key component here with the Deutsch connector hooks up your factory Porsche oil pressure switch. So I'll show you what that's adapted on later. And that goes right onto here on the loom. And this is your main loom, equipped with relays. These are for your GM ECU. This is for your Porsche body connection side with 3 wires. All the wires are labeled, so I'm going to figure out what I want to do with those 3 to put them into the remaining plug. But yeah, just really high quality. They're all labeled like this: ground. This one here, number 8, that's an injector. This one here, throttle. They're all upside down, but you get the point.
These are the shifter cables by Chavis Engineering as well. Very high quality all steel, similar to the numeric shifter cables. And this is the billet aluminium bell housing adapter that comes complete with studs and locking nuts.
This is the induction package from CPE with MAF and billet mount, filters and elbows. These are the CPE lines for the AC adapter kit with fittings and belt. This is the electric power steering kit, pump, bracket, lines, fittings and circuit breaker. The clutch and flywheel kit through CPE ships directly from spec. The spacing correlated to the adapter plate and stock Porsche transmission. I went with the Stage 3 Plus option. Spec told me the Plus is to denote a more factory feel, and I can report it is maybe 20% stiffer pedal feel than the original Porsche clutch. Installing the shifter cables while everything's out of the car. I won't bore you with this, there's loads of install videos online already.
The power steering pump is as follows. 2 sheet metal screws. One of these already had a factory nut location, the other one I just riv nutted, and one down in the bottom as well. I have these 2 brake reference lines, you might not, I just had to move those out of the way a little bit. So the pump is mounted like this. You've got high pressure going out the back there and low pressure return here. And those lines just come across through around the back of this. And this is where you have to drill the hole. So this surface here is nice and flat. So just hole saw 1, 2, and then join them together. The 2 lines go through there. This is a piece of rubber hose that I just super glued in place. You can take the headlight out to help you maneuver those.
Now from the wheel well you can see the 2 lines coming out underneath the headlight bucket. The high pressure shielded and secured along the top, the low pressure swoops down the bottom and then just clearance the fender liner. And both lines go straight into the factory rack with the fittings from CPE.
I did try multiple ways of routing the high pressure and low pressure lines this way through factory grommets over there, but you just can't get the turn that you need, and also getting past the battery is a real pain. So that's the best way by far to go that way. The electrics for the pump, so I have them coming through factory grommet. I just cut a hole in back here, so this is all shielded. This here, brown one, is your ground. Then you've got the power through a breaker. That one was red on mine.
The black and blue wires get joined and go to the fuse panel in the driver footwell and a fuse adapter to accessory power on. Basic stuff you need on the engine. Aftermarket fuel rails. The Jag ones work real nice with a 12-inch AN line 180 degree off the front and another 180 to the OEM style clip fitting that will mate straight up to the stock unmodified fuel line in the engine bay. A lower mount alternator, lower mount for the AC compressor already shown with the CPE fitting attached, and valve covers that hold the coil packs. Going with the Canton Racing front sump means you can utilize the oil filter adapter, which will allow you to plug in the oil pressure sending unit from the Porsche. As you can see, I adapted mine around at a 90-degree angle to clear where I wanted the exhaust to go. Now looking at the back of the intake, you're going to want to adapt your fuel crossover to back here. You can see this is an AN line connecting the 2 JEGS fuel rails. The rubber hose here I have connected up to my brake booster, and that sensor behind there on the left is the LS3 oil pressure sensor. And this is the blue plug that's in the wiring harness for that, so you're going to want to make sure you have the correct sensor that plugs into that. There's a few variations, but with this picture you should be able to tell. Lay the wiring harness over the engine. You can start by plugging in the coil packs and injectors. All those wires are numbered for the cylinder number. The beginning of the wiring harness with the ECU plugs will double back and head over there between the coil packs on the passenger side of the vehicle. The rest of the wiring harness goes on to the right. You can see there the wires going down to the starter and knock sensor, as well as the two O2 plugs right here.
So on this side I have removed the starter to run these wires down. They're going to go just behind this header and along. So that's the knock sensor, the two starter wires, and the crank position sensor. Like bank to knock, crank, so easy. So these are running down behind there just to protect them. I got this piece of reflective heat shielding cut. I'm just going to wrap that in that. They'll be in behind there, and then I'll put the starter back on. It's really hard to get to that sensor there, the crank position, with the starter in place. This is more of the wiring here, you can see, and it all comes labeled. So this one says throttle, this one here says map, this one here says number 2 for cylinder 2. It's all very easy.
The main coolant lines coming from the body, these need to be cut and adapted to fit the hoses from the CPE kit. So just cut right there before it steps up to the rubber flange piece, and you can pull this line out to do that, and then that's where you're going to flange it so that you can fit on your rad hose.
So started with this, turned it into this. See that bead? Using these. So let's go over the cooling setup. This is the one factory coolant line that I beveled the end off. Rubber hose to the 90 degree, that one's provided by CPE, to the other rubber hose, and that one will go in the top of the water pump. The other factory water line comes up, that's where it ends, cut, crimped around the edge. Straight rubber hose, aluminium 90, and this one that's going to drop down into the thermostat on the LS. So the both 90s, the rubber hose, which this and that one are made out of the same rubber hose, just cut in half, and this rubber hose are provided by CPE. So basically all the bits you need other than the clamps.
This is the output from the water pump coming off the passenger side. You can see here where I cut it just to make more room, and the belt doesn't ride there, so it won't affect it.
Here on this side of the water pump, you can see this is the snout that I cut short just to make sure I have room here on the back. That also goes in. This is included in the kit, and that elbow is included in the kit. So this is the neck for the thermostat. This is one of the universal types you can swivel. This is the pipe included in the kit. And the rest of the cooling setup. So these are the two heater hoses from the interior heater. And so I cut those here. This is just a nutsert into this frame here, just to put these two hose clamps in. They're not actually clamped down. They're just holding the hoses there. I added a couple PVC 90s. I might change those out for steel or something. Then the two hoses run up, again, riv nut to the body, riv nut to the body, attached to the coolant tank there. And then these two will go into the heater outlet, which come out right here from the LS water pump. So here you can see the two outlets from the water pump. This one comes along, that's a straight join. And here there's a T, and the T runs into the bottom of that. And this goes to the front of the car. Also this, which is open when hot, this is the front one, this will be connected to the other one that runs to the front, like that. This is the below view of the header tank. So this is a reused Porsche line running up to the T in that line that goes there for the water pump there and to the front of the car there. And so this steam port here is coming out with a line that will go right to this here, the factory steam location for the Porsche.
You need to mount the adapter to the bell housing of the transmission first. Get all those studs and nuts torqued. Then you need to remove the starter from the LS engine. This is an important thing LS guys know about potentially breaking off the mounts on the engine due to the tight clearance of where the starter fits into the adapter on the transmission. So here you can see the clutch and flywheel kit's all installed. We're just going to slide the transmission on, and obviously always mounting the splines to the clutch is a little tricky, but it takes time. It's easier to do with it out of the car. In this case, it's the obvious choice. Do it outside of the car. It's way easier. As for final bolts from the bell housing adapter into the engine, make sure you get bolts that are going to use as much thread as possible, depending on if you want to run washers or locking washers. I went with a single steel washer on mine and I had to change my bolts out because they only grabbed about 4 threads, and that's not enough into the cast aluminium block. So you can measure your holes depending on what engine block you have and figure out how to maximize your thread usage in the block. Getting the engine and transmission in and out of the chassis while you test fit stuff is honestly really easy compared to other cars, especially if you have a table lift system, which I don't, as you can see.
So from this view you can kind of see how much I had to cut away over here and down here. So if that's the line of the motor mount, I cut pretty close to that just to give that lots of room. This is your thermostat housing. You can see that doesn't touch there, just looks like it. And coming across here, the more space you leave here, the easier it is to get the engine in and out. I can see that more there. So lots of room in case you wanted to put a turbo in. And on top of this line, so that is just enough room almost for a hand.
Very important disclaimer. I mounted my engine and transmission further back in the chassis the first time, which means that you need more clearance on the front on that cut that I just showed to give room for the water pump. The water pump does have to come off in order to mount the motor plates onto the engine, so you have to put the water pump on once the engine's in the car. It also meant I didn't have to modify the subframe to the transmission. At this point, I was more focused on getting the car up and running and leaving myself as much room to troubleshoot anything at the back of the engine. I will come to that in the future when I move the engine forward in the chassis later on.
So if you keep the engine to the rear of the car, this is what you get. This is your sway bar. This is the cross member, factory location. That's how much room I have there. So you don't have to trim this if you keep the engine in this position. Does mean you need more clearance here at the front for the air filter to come in. But all of this fits really nice, and I got lots of room up there behind the engine to reach and do stuff. Here now, viewed from underneath. Here we can see my ground wire going from the block to the factory ground location on the frame rail. We've got the Porsche oil pressure sensor from the Porsche block. That's just adapted with a 90-degree fitting to here, and those are the wires coming down for that. Still got to be connected. This is the knock sensor with the wiring as it comes. I've wrapped the headers, so this is coming out on the rear of the engine, which is frontmost in the car, and that will be adapted and swooped down towards the back of the car this way. So here you can see more of the oil filter adapter sitting there right in front of the flywheel. So the positive wire that went to the Porsche engine, that's it here, shielded. So that comes from the chassis from the front. Got it linked to here. This is the battery cable that comes in the kit. That goes around the front of the engine that way, and that's our alternator switch. Following that battery cable around, it's tied off with these anchor points to the pan, and that runs along to there, the starter here. So here we can see that battery cable coming in, the starter switch. This will be ground, it's connected to there for the AC pump. Here, this, another factory knock sensor, and again the header, bell housing adapter, and that exhaust will get routed here, that direction. So this is an exhaust mount that I fabricated. So it mounts onto the block there using some ARP hardware, and it holds the factory exhaust right where it should be. I have another one for the other side. The vacuum for the brakes. So that is this big one in the middle here. You can see I've added this hose, which is a very snug fit onto that. So that goes to the brake booster. And then I've got it just running to a line here. Then on the back of the LS, you can see that goes to the vacuum port.
I ended up removing this T here, so ignore that.
And then this step-up barb here. And so that will pull vacuum from the intake to go to the brake booster at the front. These are the fuel lines, so I'm using a 180-degree AN to a soft AN line to another 180. Hooking right back into the factory fuel outlet from Porsche there. So that's hanging there on the factory grommet.
This is the aluminium bracket I made for mounting the ECU. It's all riv nuts with 2 riv nuts on the back to hold the relays, and bent into shape with foam between the mounting surfaces. And then the ECU provided with the kit just mounts right on top. For this harness and a 996.2, you have 3 extra wires at the Porsche plug end of the harness. The yellow is coolant temp from the sensor on the head, red and black come from the oil pressure sensor. These go straight to the dashboard, so I recommend testing them in this type of setup to make sure you got the pinning correct. It is very common to get the oil pressure ones backwards, as it depends on how you wired the physical sensor. You can of course depin the factory socket and leave those 3 in, or the easier way is just to pull the necessary 3 out of the plug and join them. I put heat shrink over them individually before loom protection, then bagged and taped up the factory plug in case I need any of that wiring in the future. Now behind the rear seats, this is where you get your money's worth with the CPE kit. Pull all the plugs out of this factory box, and they all plug straight in the same order to the CPE box. Then I just used double-sided tape and stuck that box right on top. This wiring connection over to the second box provided by CPE, this could not be more simple. 1 plug one side, 1 plug the other side. The blue and green fan wires, if you're using factory fan controllers, which I am, those just connect back to one another and stay in the harness on the right. Then you've got your little Deutsch connector that will go to the OBD2 port.
Okay, this is the genuine first time. ECU, wired. The first turnover in 7 months.
Plug your ears.
Oh yeah, there's no exhaust.
Oh, stop!
Oh, stop! So this is the actual first start. The first one we were just kidding. We found a fuel leak. This will be the first crank.
And this is the exhaust setup I went with. O2 sensor, high flow cat, 2 basic mandrel bends feeding into the factory Porsche unmodified exhaust.
So here we are. The swap is complete. I've been daily driving the car to work and just daily activities, enjoying the heck out of it. On a note of the exhaust, it's great. I would really recommend it. It is not too loud. There's no drone on the highway, but still very loud when you get on it under a tunnel. Lessons learned. This is the engine mounted with the CPE kit furthest back. Move the engine forward. I'll repeat. Mount the engine in the forward position. This means flipping your transmission mount, drilling 2 holes, or slotting 2 holes in the trans mount that's up there. And then these mounts just flip and mount on the other side. It gives you a lot more clearance for this intake as well as for the latch. As you can see, this doesn't really fit. So this is how much you'd have to cut and then make around. So I will be moving the engine forward in this when I get some time and I don't want to drive it. But the benefits of having the engine far back, the fuel crossover line and the coolant lines and everything that run on the far side of the engine are super easy for me to get to. So I was able to troubleshoot a fuel leak on one of those lines. And if you had to troubleshoot any of your coolant lines or electrical connectors that are at the back of the engine, which is towards the front of the car, it's way easier to do with the engine in this position. So that was my plan, was to get it set in this position, make sure it all worked and was happy, and then to flip the mounts and adjust the coolant hoses. All you have to do is adjust the length on those on either side. Then I'll be able to get the engine further back in and improve this whole situation. Heat wrap is your friend. This is relatively inexpensive stuff I got online. Most of the wiring and ground connections and AC lines and everything that's run down near the exhaust has got heat wrap on it. Wiring loom cover is also your friend. This stuff fairly inexpensive. I just bought 2 different sizes. The coolant hoses that are near each other are wrapped with that. Any wiring that I was running along the body and zip tying, or I just wanted to make it more rigid so that the wire would stay straight between 2 areas, put that on it. Super cheap. If you do it from day 1 before the engine is in, you'll never have to worry about it again. Riv nut tool. Riv nutting into the chassis. I'm using P-clamps. I used the riv nut tool a lot. I had to go on Amazon and buy more. The header flanges. So I bought the headers with the CPE kit. They're a relatively inexpensive header, but they put your exhaust collector at the bottom of each side, right where you want it, to give you the most room for building your exhaust, which meant that I had room to put cats in. Obviously a lot of different header systems will work, but if you're buying brand new ones, get the flange surface machined flat or ground flat. Lots of them come raw cast, like mine did, and they were not flat. Also, if you're going to be running a dipstick like me, right here by the air filter, I noticed on hard launches, especially uphill, where the oil was all at the back here, it was forcing the dipstick up and out and spilling oil on my filter. So if you're going to run a dipstick in this location, I know this pan, the Canton racing pan, you can mount it in that side as well. You're going to have the same problem, just not on the air filter. But if you're going to run a dipstick like this, find a way to secure the top, or get one with some type of clip on the top of it so it can't just come shooting out. Some questions I've had from other people who are doing the swap, this is more detailed stuff. The wiring loom when you're trying to mate it to the engine. So the GM ECU is here and the Porsche body connectors are here. So the loom goes in a U. With these connections here, it then curves and around to that side. The wiring for the driver's side knock sensor and the starter, those go in front of the head and down on top of the starter. They will fit. The exhaust brackets, so I saw a lot of people who were mounting factory exhaust or mufflers in the factory muffler location for the 911. They were just welding, you know, exhaust brackets onto the sheet metal of the body. I don't recommend this. It didn't look like something I wanted to do for risk of just pulling and tearing the sheet metal. So unless you were going to reinforce it with something and weld it onto the body, that was just a level I didn't want to go to. So I used the factory LS3 block mounts, which are on the V. And so I made a pad from there, and then I built out just a support to the factory exhaust. So that is effectively that muffler hanging off the engine like it was off of the 3.6 Porsche engine. That's how they hang it. So the engine drivetrain is fixed to the mufflers, and then I still have the factory expansion joint between the catalytic converter and the muffler. So they can still heat expand, and the dampers are built into the Porsche mounts for the mufflers. Basically straight to the block, to the muffler, to a mount. And it worked well for me. Took me about a day of fab, and then another couple hours of cleanup and paint. Definitely would do that system again. Clutch. So with the CPE kit, he sells a spec clutch, straight from spec. Basically has the correct spacing for the flywheel, and then regular pressure plate for whatever type of power you want to make, and then the friction disc in the middle has the correct splines to mate to your Porsche transmission. It's super easy. He's already done the work, told them what to do, and then you just order through them what stage you want, how much power you're looking to put down. I like to abuse my cars, so I like a really strong clutch. So I went with the stage 3 plus spec. The system, they told me that the plus to them signifies an OEM feel. So you've got stage 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, but then the plus on top basically is overpowered spring or whatever, so it feels pretty close to stock. Mine feels very close to stock, a little bit stiffer, which is good. That's what I like. But if I do have some feedback, it's that the clutch is a bit too aggressive. It's good for, I think, 750 foot-pounds of torque. I put it in there to be, you know, overbuilt, and if I ever wanted to do more power, I would be safe. But honestly, if I was to do it again, I think I might go with a stage 2 plus clutch. I don't see myself needing more power in it as a street car. It's a convertible, it's never going to be that fast on a racetrack. With that in mind, retrospectively, I think I would go with a stage 2 plus clutch, which is like, you know, probably 550, 600 foot-pounds, and just a little better drivability. This clutch does chatter when you're trying to engage it at low speeds a little bit, so it's a little bit harder to kind of drive smooth, and sometimes it has that chatter, and you know, people around don't know what it is, they think you don't know how to drive, but yeah, it's a give and take. It's clearly a very strong clutch. The tune, so I bought the ECU kit as well with the wiring harness from CPE. That comes with a basic, basically like a performance GM tune from factory, like if you buy their crate motors. So that gets you like 80-85% of the way there. It allowed me to get the car on the road, prove out the cooling system, you know, get all the air out of it, go and get my exhaust made, get everything up to temp, make sure everything worked, find a fuel leak and resolve that. all before it went to the dyno. That's crucial. That's exactly what I wanted. I talked to Tyler. He was willing to make it happen. The details from the tuner then, retrospectively, get your AC filled before you take it for a tune. The AC will add a little extra load idle, and they can account for that when they're tuning it. The driving before I went to the dyno also allowed me to put fresh fuel in. The swap took 6 months total through a winter, October 1st till early May. So that fuel was 6 months old. So it allowed me to go out, drive the car, put a whole bunch of fresh fuel in it, drive it through, and then take it to the tuner with fresh, good fuel. Another thing that most people overlook. Using an HP tuner, you're able to disable things that the GM engine is looking for, like fuel level sensor and evap and other things that it will throw a code for. And it'll throw a code, and then the Porsche dash will display an engine light, but when you go to read it from the Porsche system, it'll say it can't connect to the module. So then you scan it through your port for the GM ECU, and that's when it tells you what the code is. So if you have an HP tuner or whoever tunes your car, they'll be able to go through and disable those things that you no longer have on your engine, depending on what you do have. Then you end up with this. So this is fully seamless. Everything in the dash works. Coolant, oil pressure, battery voltage, everything works just as it should. And my engine will still throw a code and will display an engine light on the dash when there is an issue. And if that issue is coming from the GM ECU, then you'll have to plug into that OBD2 to read it. This time last year, I had never worked on a Porsche before. Until 6 months ago, I had never worked on or been up close with any LS, really, or any American car. That is not required to do this swap. It is so easy. This car makes 400 horsepower to the rear wheels and weighs 3,000 pounds, and it's the heavy convertible. It's really fun to drive. This swap probably costs as much as if you bought a used 996 and took it to the dealer and asked them to fix the oil leaks and do your IMS bearing. It probably costs that much to do this whole swap. And now I have the 911 engine unharmed still to sell. If I had to replace this car tomorrow and I bought another 996 that had no issues, clean car, working engine, I would do the swap again. The power and reliability that you can get with an LS, the original flat 6 was prone to failure, oiling issues, valve guide issues, bore scoring issues. There's a reason why they don't support the engines. There's a reason why they're 30 grand US to rebuild. If I had another one today, I would take that engine out, sell it to somebody who needed it, and put in an LS. Much smaller, much more powerful, way easier to fix and find parts for. And that, I did everything by myself, basically, on a set of quick jacks in a garage. It's super easy. I bought a very cheap welder to do the exhaust brackets, and I bought a riv nutting tool. Everything else was basic tools, impact gun, wrenches.